Okay, so getting back to what we were going to show in this one, I want to show you just briefly, because we don't have a lot of time left, we have about 40 minutes left. I'm going to show you briefly how to do blogs. I don't think I'm going to get to discussion groups, but discussion groups will work very similar to blogs. The primary difference between the two is that blogs are actually created as subsites, whereas discussion groups are just web parts. But other than that, there's a lot of other similarities between the two. In the way that you post information, in the way that you can respond to it and have comments to things, and in the way that you set up rights. So if I can get you to understand blogs, you might be able to make it through discussion groups, or like I said before, we do have this one recorded from some prior sessions where we did both the blogs and the discussion groups. You'll be able to go back and watch the videos to see how you go through in creating it. So I'm going back to this demo site that I had, and if you want to follow along, I believe all of you can follow along in this one as well. This one should be no problem following. And what we're going to do is we're going to come up to the little gear. We're going to go down to site contents. Now under site contents, where it has all the apps, it's going to also show you all of your current subsites. And if you have other subsites under the current one, you'll see those. We're going to create a new subsite, which you've done before. And when you create a new subsite, in this case, this is one of the few exceptions where we're going to create a subsite using a template under collaboration. But first, let's give it a name. I'm going to call this one Class Blog. Description, optional. If you want to put one in, I'm just going to repeat the same thing. Class Blog. I'll call it Class Blog Live for a description, and then a address for it. I tend to keep addresses, the URLs, as simple as possible so that they're short. I don't make them very long. So in this case, I might just call it CB. I'm going to just call it CB2 because I might have done this one before, so I don't want to clash. And we want to create a blog collaboration site or a subsite. I always start off using the same permissions as the parent. We are going to change some of the permission information a little bit later, but we're going to start off by using the same permissions. And we are going to include it in the top link bar just so I can find it easily. You can decide later when you build your own sites whether that's appropriate or you just want to create a link to your blog somewhere on the page, maybe the top level page. And I'm going to create that blog site. It'll take a few moments. And when it comes back, the blog site will automatically include a default blog entry. It also includes some categories for your blogs. It starts off with 3 default categories. I'll show you in a little bit how you can change those. And because I'm the creator of this blog site, whoever actually creates the blog subsite is the creator of the blog subsite. You're going to have a full set of tools over here. Now, if you're not the creator, if you're just somebody who can go in and make changes, you'll have some of these options, but not all of them. As creator, though, you'll have all of these tools. So the first one that is a little bit of interest probably is how do you create a new blog? Well, the first tool is create a post. They're called posts, not blogs, but so you go in and click on create a post, give it a title. I'm going to call this one, this is my second blog. And then this is the text of my second blog and whatever else I want to do. And then I can define what category I want this blog to be under. Now, the whole point of categories is, again, that over time, you're going to have a series of these blog entries. By having a series of blog entries, you're going to reach a point where you're not going to be able to find things. And you want to be able to categorize your blogs, like, for instance, by grade level or by curriculum, or whatever you decide you want to use at your school. So that if you want to go back and just see things by a certain grade, you could, and we'll show this in a second once I put a couple of these out, you'll be able to select the category and only see the blog entries for that grade. So I'm just going to select one of these. Maybe I'll select 2. I can double click. I don't have to click here and then, actually double clicked again. I don't have to click here and then click add. I don't like going back and forth and clicking multiple places. Yes, you can do that, but I find it far easier just to go over something and double click very quickly to move things back and forth. And yes, you can move them both ways. As with any blog, if you have a blog currently anywhere, pretty much anywhere, I know WordPress does this, you can publish a blog either immediately or at some point in the future. No, there's no way to publish to the past. Question? Did you have a question? No. Okay, anyway. So if you wanted to say, if you wanted to create a blog entry, you only want it to appear tomorrow, you can do that. If you want to freak out all the people at work and think that you're up all night writing this blog, sweating over your hot PC, you can post it so that it comes up at 3 in the morning. And all you have to do is come down here, and if I wanted it to come up at 3 in the morning, I would select tomorrow. And instead of 3 p.m., I would say 3 a.m. And once I publish that particular blog entry, it would only show up in the morning. I'm going to let this one be immediate. And there's another way I can make it immediate without trying to figure out what the exact time is. I'm just going to change it back to today, but say 3 a.m. Since that's a past time, it's going to be immediate. Okay? There's no time machine. You can't publish things to the past. So it's only going to be immediate or the future. And then click publish. So you see that you now have a second blog entry, and you can go on and keep on adding more and more blog entries. The reason the second blog entry is below the first one is because of the date and time. This one had 3 a.m., the second one, whereas this other one, when I created the site, I just created the site a couple minutes ago, so it thinks it's actually more recent. But if you normally just let it go and publish without changing the date and time, the most recent one will always be at the top. Does that make sense? Why it's backwards right now? So then, if I want to make any, well, let's first do something else. Let's put a comment in. Hector, are you following me? Hector, can you respond to the second blog with a comment? Because right now, if you look down here, it says 0 comments. And what I've asked Hector to do is put a comment in, and when he tells me he's ready, I'll refresh the page. So I'm going to refresh the page, and you see now it says 1 comment. If I want to know what he said, I can click on the comment, and yeah, it keeps asking me who I am. And even if I click remember, it doesn't. It's got a terrible memory. So this is Hector's comment. I'm hungry. What's for dinner? Yeah, typical Hector. And that was his picture last week. Wait, you need to see it better. There you go. Yeah. I was going to ask your mom if you had even a younger one.
Oh, I do?
Well, maybe I can, next time I see her, I'll ask her to get a younger one. Anyway, so if I want to, I can respond back to that particular comment. Now, this can go on and on back and forth. I think Hector's the only one that actually uses a real picture of himself, even though it's a few days ago.
Yeah, I think so.
Most of the rest of us use some other images and icons, but that's beside the point. You can always do whatever you want within the school, whatever your rules are. If you have to use real pictures or not, that's up to you guys. But, you know, we're kind of a strange group, and we follow our own kind of rules. In case you can't see what it is, it's a little cockatiel. It's my pet at home. So, yeah. Anyway, the thing that's interesting about the blog, or maybe the thing that you want to be at least warned of, is that there's no way to tell what the comment refers to. The comments are just entered sequentially. So I put a comment in. I'm specifically commenting to Hector's comment, but really I don't know. Because if I were to comment to the main blog itself, like Hector, put another comment in to the main blog itself. And let me know when you're ready.
Ready.
So you see it just added it to the bottom of the list. I have no way of knowing if he's responding to my comment or if he's responding back to the blog itself. That's one of the problems with the way blogs are set up. when you have people commenting and they're commenting back and forth, there's no thread. You know what I mean by a thread? Basically, it tracks, what the conversation is. That's what a discussion group does differently. The discussion groups actually track threads. So you know when a comment is made, what it's being made to. Because when you display it, it will show it as indented if you use the threaded view, not the flat view. And like I said, I'm not sure I'm going to have time to go through that because there's couple other things I need to do with blogs here. So at least be aware of that difference between what a blog is and what a discussion group is. That's primarily one of the differences between the two. Now, I come back in here and I decide I don't like some of these comments. Like, for instance, he didn't like what I said we were going to have for dinner. So I'm going to come in and I can say, since I'm the owner, I have rights to do this. I can say edit. I can see his comment. If I don't like his comment, I can make a change to it. Instead of saying blah, I can say yay. And I could save it that way by just clicking save. Or if I just want to get rid of it entirely, I can click delete item. So as owner, you can go through and you can modify the blog comments. You can even, if you allow, and be careful the way I'm saying this, listen carefully, if you allow other people to add blog posts to your blog site, you can also delete them as well. Now, when we talk about permissions in a few minutes, I'm going to show you how you can prevent that from happening, where no one else can make an entry of another post to your blog, that only you can add posts to your blog. But by default, anyone that has edit rights to this particular site, because we inherited permission, is going to be able to go in and add a post to the blog. Now, in some cases, that's what you want. If you want a team blog where everybody in the team can comment on things, then maybe you do want everyone in the team that has content edit rights to be able to post blogs. But if you're creating a blog site specifically for your principal, the principal may not want other people to create posts under his name. I'm just saying, it's not very common. So it depends on what you're using the blog for. You're going to maybe modify the permissions. But we'll get to that when we get to how to modify the permissions. First, a couple of other things. So we can also manage comments by going into Manage Comments in our tools. And we'll see all the items here. We can again click on Edit, which would show the same view as we had before. And when we're in the edit view, we can make changes because we are the owner, or we can go to delete item. And then we have these little ellipse things again, which if we click on the ellipse, there's delete item there as well. So in this case, actually using the ellipses is faster to be able to delete something. But before I do that, before I get rid of some of these, I'm going to go back and I want to make some other changes and look at some other things. Notice this one, I put in the opinions category. I can go in and I can modify this particular comment, this particular blog post, by going to edit. Because maybe I was going through it quickly, I added it, didn't add everything. And now I want to add events as well, republish it. And now it's published under opinions and events. Now, I don't have a lot of other events right now, so just take that for what it's worth. Imagine I had a lot of other events, a lot of other posts. If I wanted to see only the items that were under opinions, I would click on opinions, and it's only going to show me that one blog post. If I click on something like ideas, which right now I don't think there are any, I'm not sure. No, there are not. So it's going to come back and tell me there were no posts in that case. If I click on events, it should show me that one, which is the one that I just created. So you can basically go back and forth and view just subcategories of your blog post. Now by going back up and just clicking on the breadcrumb link at the top, it's going to go back, get rid of all the filters, and display all the posts again. So once I have all the posts displayed, I might come back and say, well, those 3 categories aren't enough. I need some other categories. I want to put in some curriculum levels so that when they post a blog or put a post out to the blog, that they can put a different category in. So I go to Manage Categories, and it's showing me all the categories. All the categories is a list. Remember I talked about lookup lists before? That's what this is. This is a lookup list. It's actually another list that's being referenced by the posts, and this lookup list is going to have just the categories in. In fact, it only has one column, the title column, which is the default column. Remember we talked that there's always going to be a single column when you create a new list. It's going to be called title. You cannot delete it, but you can rename it if you want to. Since no one's going to really see the name of this column, it really doesn't matter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new item. And I'm going to put in calculus and save it. So now I got 4 categories. If I go back to my blog, and if I were to create a new post, you're going to see there are 4 items in the category list now. So I can manage my category list that way. I could also go directly into the list the traditional way and edit the list manually. And when I say the traditional way, let me cancel this. I'm not going to save that one. Come on, you can cancel. Cancel should be easy. Should be easier than creating. Sometimes it's just a tad slow. I can go into site contents. And you can see the list that exists at this point. There's a list for categories, a list for comments, actually a library for photos, and then a list for posts. The only reason I know one's a library and the other's a list is because of the icons being used, okay? The ones with folders are libraries, the ones with pages are individual lists. So our posts are stored here, our categories are stored here. If I wanted to modify the categories the traditional way, I'm back to the same screen as when I click Manage Categories. So that part's no different. You just have options of the way you want to create it. Going back to my blog, what are some of the other options here? Well, let's try something like changing the post layout. Right now it's basic. There's also something called boxed, which kind of separates out your individual blog entries, makes it a little bit easier to see where one stops and ends. There's also inline. And those are the only options right now. I don't know if Microsoft's going to come out with more. I know we really don't have time to try to build others, but these are the 3 that are built in. I'm going to leave it at boxed for right now. So we talked about create posts, manage comments, manage categories. Manage posts just shows us all the posts in a traditional list format. We could also go and go into the list directly, like I showed you for the categories, and be able to modify them there as well. Since I'm an owner, I can go in and do any of these I want. Notice categories is a multi-valued field, just like we talked about earlier about multi-valued fields. So that's all the different tools except for one. Now, the last time I showed this, it kind of got hung up and stopped. I'm going to try it, but if it stops, I'm just going to move on to permissions. This option here where it says launch blogging app. Any idea what a launch blogging app might do? Any guesses? Okay, well, because we only have a limited amount of time, I'm not going to give out the $100 prize, but the launch blogging app is really to open up Word. So we'll see if it tries to open up Word for me, or if it just hangs. It takes a while to open Word, but sometimes it just hangs. Are we going to say it hangs? Maybe it'll come back later, but I'm not going to wait because we just don't have time. If we had more time, I would go off and do discussion groups, and it might come back by then. Yeah, in case you're looking at the weird task manager, it is a little different than what you might be used to, but it's Windows 8. So I'm going to go back to the class blog site or subsite. And what I want to do is look at permissions. And when I look at permissions, I can look at permissions this way for the overall site, and you can make some changes there if you want to. But perhaps more important than making the changes to the overall site is making changes to the individual libraries, the individual lists. So for that, you would go to Site Content. And the one that I want to look at first is Posts. And under Posts, I want to go to the List ribbon, List Settings. And under List Settings, there's this Advanced Settings options. You don't want to go to permissions for this list. This is a little different than what you're used to for other things. You want to actually go to Advanced Settings. And the second part of Advanced Settings is the part that's important. This item level permissions. This is the tricky part. Now by default, there's two pieces to this, and this is the way it's set up by default as far as the permissions. Read access. Specify which items users are allowed to read. And it says users can read all items. Now that still means that you have to have rights to this particular library, to this subsite. List, library, and subsite. If you don't have access to this list, library, or subsite, then even having this option set to read all items won't make a bit of difference. You could also say read items that were created by the user. What that would mean is you can read your own blogs, but you cannot read someone else's. That's an interesting one. That's a way of setting up private blogs within a single blog subsite. And there's something else you're going to have to change, but that's one of the pieces you would have to change, because you only want to be able to read your own blog entries within that site. You don't want to be able to allow the person to read other people's blog entries. So it's more like a personal blog at that point. The second option, create and edit access, specify which items users are allowed to create or edit. This is an interesting one because it starts off as a default, create and edit all items. What that really means is a user that has permission to this particular library, this list, which is the post list. Anyone that has contribute rights will be able to come in and create a blog entry. That's what it basically is saying here. Now, that can be good or bad. That might be what you want. It may not be what you want. You also have an option here, create items and edit items that were created by the user. What that basically implies is that you can own, well, it doesn't really apply here so much for the posts, but when you get to comments, you can only comment to your own posts. It's kind of weird, but I guess maybe that makes sense to someone. I'm more interested in the last one, none. If I set it to none, what you may at first think is that no one can create a blog post. So if I set it up like this, you might think no one can create a blog post. It's not true. The reason it's not true is because the owner always has rights. So if I created this particular blog subsite, I can still create blog entries, but no one else can. This is the principal setting, because you don't want anyone else to create entries in the principal's blog. If it's a generic blog for a, let's say, first grade teachers group, the first one, create and edit all items, is probably the appropriate one, the default one. So it depends on what your purpose is, what you're trying to do. And if you want teachers to create just personal blogs just for them to track information but nobody else can read it, other than the owner can read everything, then they would select the read access option up here, read items that were created by the user, but they wouldn't be able to see somebody else's. So there's some options that you have when you define the blog. This goes beyond the permissions that Mike Adani was telling you earlier. You still have to do that piece of it. You still have to define who's going to have content rights to your blogs. You still have to define if you want to allow visitors to your blogs. Because if you allow visitors, visitors can read all items. But visitors cannot create anything no matter what setting you put in here. Which is another way that you could do the principal thing. You could change the permissions and get rid of the contribute group and only have the principal in. So, in anything in SharePoint, there's multiple ways of doing things, right? You just have to try to decide which way you want to go and just be consistent across your sites. If you do it one way in one subsite, do it the same way in all the subsites. Otherwise, someone else comes in and starts taking over managing the site a year from now when you move to a different school. They're not going to have a clue what's going on. So at least try to be consistent. So this is the tricky part. If as you move forward and you start playing with creating sites and creating blog sites and you want to set something up, if you want to talk to us first, either call us, come to one of the open labs, and we'll go through this for you. Okay? Any questions about blogs? What I'm going to try to do, instead of creating a discussion group, I'm going to show you an existing one for the sake of time that's already been created. This discussion that's down here has already been created. It's called Class 2 Discussion. It's just as a title. It's a web part put on a page, an existing page. It's not a separate subsite. And that's because the way the SharePoint handles discussions is a little bit different internally. What you see here is just the main discussion topics. Some people call it discussion questions because they can really be questions or they can just be the topic that you want to discuss. For instance, in this first one, I want to know how to create a private blog. If I were to click on that one, it's going to open up a page. And when I say open up a page, the page that it opens is actually a virtual page. This doesn't really truly exist. Just like some of the other things we talked about before. It creates a page on the fly to display the information. Now in that first page, it may not show all the details of that discussion. It may only show X number of characters, and I haven't figured out what X is, but it's not the entire discussion. If you have a very long description, it's going to truncate it at some point with a couple of periods. But when you click on it, and click on the topic, it's going to show you all the details, whatever you wrote down in the discussion area. It's also going to show you any of the comments. Now right now the comments are pretty much in a straight line. It's called the flat view. Not a very interesting view in my mind because you don't know what people commented to or from. But if you open up the list tab, you see it says flat here for the current view. If you go to threaded instead, you lose the picture from the person. However, what you see that is indented. In this particular case, what that means is the second entry was actually a response to the top one, and this third one was actually a response to the second. If the third one was a response to the first, it would be at the same indent level as the second. Now, I know it's a little bit hard to see the indents sometimes because Microsoft, for whatever reason, decided to only do 2-character indents. I think they should have been at least 4-character. But, again, they didn't ask me. There's a lot of things they didn't ask me. I don't know why. But, unfortunately, I think it's a little difficult to see that indent. Nor do they have any type of lines to indicate what the indent really looks like. If anyone used the old news groups that were on the internet, some of those, they actually, depending on the news reader that you had, they would actually show you lines that would show you how things were indented and made it a little bit easier to follow. It's not awful, but it's not as good as it could have been. I'll leave it at that. But this is what's different between a discussion group and a blog, because the discussion group does show the threading, or at least you have the option of showing the threading. Does that make sense? Permissions work the same way. When you go in, you can go in and look at the way that the discussion is set up, and it will have multiple lists that are supporting this, but they decided not to make it a subsite, but it still has multiple lists. And you would do the same thing that you did in the blog site in terms of determining can anybody respond, who can respond to what, and so forth. Normally for discussion groups, I don't change anything because the defaults generally are anyone who has edit rights to the site can put in a discussion topic, and anybody can respond to anything else in a discussion. So you can respond to the topic itself, and you can respond to other people's comments. And normally for a discussion group in a collaboration site, that's probably what you want. So I normally don't change these. It's only in when you're creating a blog that I would change some of the permissions depending on how I wanted to use that blog. Any questions about this part? Probably information overload, kinda, sorta. Are we kind of full for the day? Well then, what I'm
You
gonna...
guys awake?
I'm not getting any response. They must all be asleep.